Hi everyone, this is Frank Ambrosio, bioinformatics scientist with Theogen Genomics, and in this video we are going to be discussing using the RASUSA workflow to downsample our read files. In this video, we'll give an overview of the RASUSA workflow. We will describe how to identify samples that need to be downsampled. We'll go over the process briefly of importing the RASUSA workflow into our workspace, and then we will cover how to configure and run the RASUSA workflow. So to kick things off, I'm going to jump over to our documentation to give an overview of the RASUSA workflow. So the RASUSA workflow is designed for downsampling. This is a sample level workflow, so individual samples will be the input, and either ONT or Illumina reads can be used. The use cases for this are typically to reduce the total amount of computational resources required for an analysis when you have FASTQ files that have far too much or far more sequencing data than is necessary. You will generally want to downsample them to a reasonable level in order to conserve compute resources. Additionally, this workflow can be used to artificially limit the amount of sequencing data in a set of FASTQ files to perform a limit of detection study. The depth of coverage can be specified. The desired level of downsampling can be specified in a number of different ways. Typically, depth of coverage is used, however, number of bases, number of reads, and the fraction of the current level of or current amount of reads can be used. When using RASUSA, it is recommended that call caching be disabled. And then please keep in mind that the fact that RASUSA is compatible with both ONT and Illumina reads means that the read2 input will be an optional input. And we'll cover that again when we go over how to configure the workflow to run it. So now let's talk about how to identify samples that should be downsampled. So whenever you perform your analysis, one of the outputs will be the estimated coverage raw. This is the estimation of the depth of coverage, the average depth of coverage across your genomic assembly based on the amount of sequencing data in your FASTQ files and the estimated length of the genome assembly. So the way we get to estimated coverage raw is the total amount of base pairs in your read1 and read2 files divided by the length of your genome, and that will give you this estimated coverage raw value here. But what we want to know is how do we know when to downsample before we run theaproc so that we don't waste computational resources? Well, one way to estimate the amount of sequencing data in your read1 and read2 files is to look at the size of the files. So here we can see we have a depth of coverage for this sample at 67.5 X coverage, and here we have 263 X coverage. So let's look at these file sizes. So for read1, if we click on the larger of these two files, we can see we have nearly half of a gigabyte. We're at 437 megabytes. That is a lot of sequencing data for a bacterial genome. And in this case, we're looking at a salmonella genome, which is about 5 million base pairs in length. And here we have close to 500 million base pairs in sequencing data, in bits in our FASTQ file. So generally speaking, what we are looking for are FASTQ files below 200 megabases. Once you get above 200 megabases, that's usually my threshold to insist on downsampling to 100x coverage using the RASUSA workflow prior to proceeding with theaproc analysis. Now let's look at this smaller FASTQ file here, sitting close to 70x coverage. Here you can see we have 100 megabases in our FASTQ file. So even 200 megabases is allowing for a little bit more than what would be required. The minimum depth of coverage for Salmonella, according to PulseNet International, is going to be 30x coverage. Now, keep in mind that is for the estimated coverage clean, and during the cleaning process, we generally lose some of our estimated coverage. So depending on how clean your sequencing data is going into theaproc, you might want to consider downsampling, allowing a little bit of wiggle room in your downsampling. Meaning if you have a lot of contaminating sequencing data, either from the host or other laboratory contaminants, you may end up significantly reducing the depth of coverage during the cleaning process, where low quality sequencing data is removed from your sample. So, let me correct myself there. If you have low quality sequencing data, you are really going to want to make sure you have more wiggle room. That is going to be the main factor that determines how much sequencing data is removed during the cleaning process. So if you have a significant amount of low quality sequencing data in your FASTQ files, you are going to want to not downsample anywhere near the minimum threshold for the estimated depth of coverage clean. So please keep that in mind. And I want to bring up the QC check table briefly here. So you can see for Salmonella, the estimated coverage clean, minimum threshold is 30x coverage. For most other pathogens, it's 40x coverage. For Campylobacter and Listeria, it's 20x coverage. So really shooting for around 50x coverage or 60x coverage would be ideal. That would be an ideal target when setting up your sequencing runs. However, oftentimes we overshoot or undershoot that target by a bit. And here you can see we have overshot by a large amount. So we would want to downsample these files prior to proceeding with Theoproc in order to ensure that we do not waste computational resources in our genomic characterization analysis. Now, we can go over the process of importing the RASUSA workflow from DocStore. So if you don't already have this workflow in your workspace, you'll navigate to the Workflows tab, click on Find a Workflow, and click the DocStore link. This will bring you to the DocStore repository where we store all of our workflows. From there, you'll click on the Organizations tab and click on Theogen Genomics, and then click on Public Health Bioinformatics. From here, you'll be able to hit Control F and search for the RASUSA workflow. Once you locate the RASUSA workflow, click on that link to follow that link to the RASUSA workflow page, where you'll be able to click the Terra button, which will bring you back to terra.bio. And here you can specify the workspace to which you would like to import the workflow. And in this case, I can use my demo workspace to import the RASUSA workflow. Now, I have already imported the RASUSA workflow. You will likely not see this pop up. If you do, that means you already have the RASUSA workflow in your workspace. In which case, you can navigate back to your Workflows tab and find the RASUSA workflow. Otherwise, go ahead and import it into your workspace. Either way, you should end up at the RASUSA configuration page. So if you already have the workflow in your workspace, please navigate to the workflow configuration page. And from here, let's go ahead and set up the RASUSA workflow for a downsampling run. So we have identified the samples that we would like to downsample, determined that they need downsampling, and we are selecting the RASUSA PHB workflow. Let's go ahead and grab the latest version of that workflow with version 2.3.0. Make sure we're always running workflows with inputs defined by data table, selecting the data table that we would like to use for this analysis. And in this case, we're going to select our Salmonella Illumina data table, but please make sure you're specifying the data table that contains the samples that you have identified as needing downsampling. From there, we can go ahead and choose the samples that need downsampling. And this is useful if you want to reanalyze samples that you've already analyzed also to bring up the estimated coverage raw and identify the samples that are particularly over-sequenced. And in this case, I'm just going to choose 2 samples and select just those 2 samples for downsample. Now remember, we want to disable call caching when using the RASUSA workflow. Now we can go ahead and specify our required inputs. First up, we have our sample name. Then we have our read1 and read2 inputs. Please keep in mind, read2 is an optional input in this case. That is to facilitate downsampling of Oxford nanopore technologies or single-ended Illumina sequencing data, just using the read one file as a required input. Next up, we have two required inputs to specify the level of downsampling that we would like to hit. In this case, we're going to specify the genome length and the depth of coverage that we would like to achieve with our downsampling. Keep in mind that the genome length is a string, so you'll have to specify it as such in quotes. In this case, we are using the average length of the Salmonella enterica genome, which is about 4.7 megabases. And you can see that the depth of coverage we're shooting for in this case is 100x coverage. So once we have all of those inputs configured, we can go ahead and hit save. Make sure that your outputs are populated using the default values and run the analysis. So in this case, I'm going to leave a note to myself, downsampling to 100x depth of coverage to conserve compute resources. And go ahead and launch that workflow. If you run into any trouble with this process, or you have any other questions, comments, concerns about the RASUSA workflow, please feel free to reach out to us at support@theagen.com. But with that, I just want to say good luck with your downsampling, good luck with your analyses, and let us know if you have any additional questions. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you again soon.